This is a short video that looks at the systems approach to management. System theory is a study which looks into how managers control the organization's relationship with the external environment. So we're here looking at an organization's relationship with the external environment. The organization may buy resources, acquire resources from the wider environment, but also the organization may affect the wider environment through its own activities. So some organizations are open to the wider external influences, and some systems are quite closed. In other words, there is very little external contact. The system seems to be self-contained. An organizational environment means a set of forces that exist in the environment which affect a manager's ability to acquire and utilize resources. So it looks at how managers can control the organization's relationship with the external environment, but the forces that are in operation within the environment, these can greatly affect the acquisition and utilization of resources. Depends on what forces are in play within the organization. There may be shortages of particular raw materials, or there may be government restrictions on the use of certain processes or certain ways of working. So organizations are open to these sort of influences, and the management within the organization will have to find ways around these restrictions if they are imposed. Open system theory provides a new area of study. Theorists acknowledged the importance of studying the environment. So all we've got here is we have this concept of an organization, and the organization may be open. In other words, it may be influenced by its environment, and in fact it may influence the environment itself, but that's an open system. Or we have this concept of a closed system in which the organization seems to be self-contained. It seems to be contained within its own premises and within its own organization and within its own way of working. So it's self-contained. It doesn't have the outside links or the need for those outside links, and it's not influenced by what's happening in the wider environment. It seems to be much more self-contained. The 1970s considered organizations as complex organisms which are constantly competing in a challenging environment. So there was this view of organizations like little creatures almost, constantly competing in a challenging environment, competing for resources, competing for life, competing to exist. And the environment in which they were operating was changing because of the onset of technological change and different patterns of world trade and different economic policies and so on. And here were these little organisms, these commercial organisms that were trying to survive and cope with all of this. Systems theory, according to von Bertalanffy. Now Bertalanffy was the founder really of systems theory. One of the big names and big thinkers in the area. Well, according to him, system theory is a system of complex groups that are arranged in a certain way to allow interaction and communication to occur through processes to achieve a goal. So a system is a complex of groups that are arranged in a certain way. It's groups of people or groups of activities that are arranged in a certain way and allow interaction and communication. So the activities may require linkages with other activities elsewhere. For example, a production system will need the supply of raw materials. The production system will also need distribution at the other end. So there are groups that are linked, and they have to interact and communicate in order to meet a certain goal. So we're starting to get this idea of a system being a method or a way of organizing the organization. It organizes, it's a double count here, but it organizes the organization. And what I mean by that is it brings a structure to the organization. So systems theory is looking at the way in which organizations function. These complex organizations that are struggling for existence because of the challenging environment in which they find themselves. They're fighting for their lives, but they're also internally made up from groups of activities, groups of individuals working on particular projects, or groups of projects themselves, however you define a group. But they're made up from these complex groups, and these are arranged in a certain way, and they're arranged so as to enable them to interact with each other, have contact with each other, and communicate. And the purpose of all of this is to achieve some goal. So the organization has a goal in mind. It's trying to achieve something. It specifies its goal. Now, of course, we would say in terms of, let's say, strategy, that it has got some sort of corporate objective, or it has a mission statement, or it has something that it's aiming for. So we've now got quite an interesting concept of systems. Systems, like organisms trying to survive in a complex and challenging environment. But inside the organism, they have these groups, activities if you like. And these are arranged in a certain way that enable them to interact. They must interact, otherwise there would be a breakage in the system and nothing would happen. So they are connected, these complex groups, and they communicate with each other, a bit like production system communicating with the stores. And these interactions enable the organization to achieve its goal. Systems and subsystems have boundaries that are selectively open or closed to the environment. This allows the smooth flow of information and other resources. So systems have subsystems within them. We talked earlier of these complex groups within the system. Well, these complex groups may constitute a subsystem, or there may be other subsystems feeding in. Take a company, for example, where we have production, we have the stores, we have materials in, and we have distribution at the other end. So we have distinct operations here, and they're all communicating, they're all trying to achieve the goal of the organization. But we also have perhaps a subsystem branching off from there, which is dedicated to research and development. And we could have another subsystem branching off which looks after human resources, or another one branching off looks at marketing. And these are, if you like, subsystems. They're feeding into the main system. They're very important. But in terms of production and making whatever it is the company is making, they don't subscribe to that directly. They enable it to happen. They facilitate it. But they're not actually making the product. That's up to production, the stores, distribution. That's the product. These are enabling it to happen. So open system theory. Well, open systems. Well, it's a system that has interactions, inputs and outputs from the environment in order to grow. So an open system interacts with the environment. It's open. It has contact with the environment in whatever manner that we see that. It has got some some contacts with the environment. If we're back to our production system for a moment, it would have, let's say, interactions with the environment in the context of the requirements within the environment, the requirements for the product in terms of safety, let's say. That will be fed back into the organization because it's an open system, and the organization will amend the product and send the product out again into the environment. It's interacting with the environment. It's looking at what is going on in the environment and responding to it. But also it may be changing the environment itself through its activities, through its marketing and through its presence in the marketplace. It may be influencing the wider environment. So it's an open system. It's interacting with the environment. Now, closed systems, this system does not allow information to pass into or out of the environment. So the closed system it's cut off from the environment in a sense. It's wrapped up in its own work. It is not in contact with the environment. It doesn't interact with it. It's closed. So it has its own systems within its own territory, if you like, within its own boundaries, and it interacts with the various parts within its own boundaries, but it doesn't interact with the outside. It's a closed system. An open system is related to an organization that brings together people to undertake activities in order to achieve goals and profit. So an open system is related to the organization in that it brings together people to undertake activities in order to achieve goals and profits. That's what the people are trying to do. They're trying to undertake activities, and they are looking at the environment, learning from the environment, in contact with the environment, and there is a toing and froing between the organization and the environment in terms of information flows for a start. Most fundamentally information flows, which will influence the goals of the organization and the profitability of the organization. Organizations are systems consisting of these characteristics. Well, interaction, the different parts of the organization interact. There's some sort of centrality within it. Normally there is a senior management, or there's some focal point normally which coordinates and enables the organization to function. Similar to a heart in a small creature that we were considering earlier. There's something central which keeps the whole thing together and keeps it running. Then of course it must have objectives. It must be aiming at something. There must be independence. It must be capable of making changes, not just coming up with ideas for change, but it must be capable of doing that, and it must be independent in order to do that. There should be integration between the parts to a greater or lesser extent. There should be integration. So there should be contact between the stores and manufacturing and distribution. And then we could widen it out. There should be contact between the stores and HR to make sure the right personnel are in place, and then there should be contact between the manufacturing and quality and marketing, and also manufacturing and HR, and so there should be integration. There should be some sort of coordination between all the various functions, and there should be an organizational structure which could be flat or could be tall. It depends on what's appropriate. Organizations are made up of individuals in different departments called subsystems. These include department, plant, company, industry, economy, and world economy. So a subsystem can be any system which links to the system we're discussing, links to it, but is in a sense separate from it as well. It's a separate function that has links. So for example, within the company, as I said earlier, if we see the company as a system, then the system is to produce a certain product and sell that product. But it'll also have subsystems related to HR. So the HR doesn't directly produce anything. It hires appropriate personnel and engages in health and safety and training and so on. But it doesn't make the product. So it's a system, a subsystem that's linked to the efficiency of the organization, but it itself does not make the product. Open systems states organizations are unique and should be structured in a way that meet organizations' requirements, problems and opportunities. So the structure of the organizations look at the problems that they face, the opportunities that are on the horizon that they may be able to perceive, depends on their entrepreneurial abilities, of course, and the types of requirements that they've got in order to function. So open systems embrace what's going on within the wider society and have linkages to it. So if we look at this very simple diagram, we have an input. The input could be labor into some process stage. So labor is put into this process stage, and out of that comes an output. And these are the inputs are coming in from the environment. Labor is coming in from the environment, processing something within the organization, putting an output, and the output goes back into the environment. And of course there is the possibility for feedback as well, coming from output back to the inputs to moderate the amount of input or the quality of the input or some aspect of the input. So that's a very, very simple model, but that gets across the idea that the inputs are coming in from the environment into some process within the organization. From the process we get an output that goes back into the environment, and we have a simple feedback. It's important that all organizations adopt some form of system which enables them to respond to challenges or problems in the business environment. So organizations tend to form into systems, and the systems enable them to come under control and to function. And there is very deep understanding of the various functions of the subsystems and the systems themselves and how they link to each other. There's a sort of fundamental knowledge within the organization, or should be in the organization, how the various parts of the organization fits together. What are the objectives of the organization, and what are the linkages with the outside environment? Because if there are linkages with the outside environment, then it's an open system. If there are no such linkages, then it's a closed system. An organization needs to take into account their customers, their suppliers, their competitors, and statutory organizations if they wish to alter their system or adopt a new information system. So if they wish to alter the system, then they would have to take these into account. You can't just change the system. The customers have to be taken into account. How will it affect the customers, the change in the system? Will it mean a longer lead time before deliveries are made to the shops, or will it mean some bad influence on the product in terms of its quality or its appearance or its value for money or its perception, just the way it looks? How will the organization relate to suppliers? If it's going to change, if the organization is going to change some aspect of its work, it needs to take the suppliers into account. Again, it can't just change without consulting them or letting them know that there's a new system in place. So an organization needs to take into account their customers, suppliers, competitors, see what the competitors are doing, and see what changes in the environment can have in the context of dealing with the competitors. And the whole idea is that the system is adapting to new information systems. As the environment changes, organizations may have to change as well. They may have to adapt. System theory is important to organizations and should be carefully planned in order to maximize an organization's profitability. So system theory is extremely important. It needs to be carefully planned. The system needs to be carefully planned and appropriate for the type of production and the type of organization. And there should be very clear understanding of the subsystems and how everything is connected, and how when it runs, how it runs and how effective it is in running. What's the relationship between the stores and the production system? That's an interface between one part of the system and another. So how is that interface managed? How is it handled? Is it efficient? Could it be improved? So system theory gives us this idea of companies as systems. Companies sometimes are closed. They don't need any contact from the outside, and they don't make contact with the outside. They're closed systems. There could be open systems, in which case they have contact with the wider environment. That's where they recruit their labor and sell their product and get their raw materials, and it's an open system. And it enables analysts to look at the organization in terms of the systems that they're using and how the internal processes of the organization are linked, which gives the linkages between the subsystems that are within the organization and the various main parts of the system itself, the main spine of the system, and how each part of it is connected. So systems approach to management is a very important topic and needs a lot of consideration and a lot of further reading. This seminar only just touches on the surface, just barely touches on the surface. It's a very superficial approach to this very important topic. It just mentions some of the ideas, just introduces them briefly. Clearly this is a topic that needs a lot more development. But that's all I'm going to deal with here, so let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.